majority of Americans between the ages of 18 and 24 think Israel, quote, should be ended and given to Hamas, a survey conducted this week by Harvard-Harris polling found. 51% of 18 to 24-year-old Americans polled said they believed the long-term answer to the Israel-Palestine conflict was for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians. Only 32% said they believed in a two-state solution, and just 17% said other Arab states should be asked to absorb Palestinian populations. A new CBS poll shows that most Americans disapprove of President Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war.
A new CBS News poll is showing most Americans disapprove of President Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, with few thinking his administration's actions are bringing things closer to a peaceful resolution. CBS's Skylar Henry joins us from the White House. Skylar, break down the numbers for us.
Good evening. There's an increasing number of Democrats who think President Biden is giving too much support for Israel.
This comes as Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin touched down in Tel Aviv this morning, where he'll meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other members of Israel's government to reiterate that America's ironclad commitment to Israel, also discussing IDF operations to dismantle Hamas and underscoring the need to protect civilians from harm and enable the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Austin's visit comes just days after Israeli forces admitted to inadvertently shooting and killing 3 Israeli hostages during a raid in Gaza. According to the IDF, the 3 young men were alone and waving a white flag when they were gunned down, which is a pretty horrible story. And the Israeli government has said that this was handled atrociously, and I hope there should be consequences for that. It's a really terrible. Imagine surviving the captivity. Possibly either they were released or they might have escaped. They were clearly not armed. They were waving a white flag and gunned down by their own side. Is really gut wrenching. But so what do you make? So I found this poll very interesting. I dug into it more deeply. There's a number of questions asked specifically about Israel and Gaza. And frankly, the one that went viral on social media that got shared, that was a very, I think, alarming, you probably found alarming as well, amount of support for Hamas among the youngest people. It's actually totally contradicted in several other questions, which makes me wonder, like, who are these people answering? It's totally contradictory, because they also said, so here's the question: if Hamas is removed, should Gaza be administered by Israel, by the Palestinian Authority, or by some new authority set up through negotiations with Arab nations? So Hamas isn't actually even an option here, but 45% of the youngest people said administered by Israel. That was actually more than any other category. 45% said administered by Israel, 41% by the Palestinian Authority, and then 14% said some new authority set up with Arab nations. In the question, should Hamas be allowed to continue to run Gaza, or do they need to be removed, 42% of the youngest demographic said allowed to continue to run Gaza, which was more than the others, but still not a majority.
That is interesting. I have to wonder, so did they also poll people of older generations? Yes. So
okay. They have 18 to 24, 25 to 34, and on and on and on, and 65 up. They have 6 different age categories.
So I wonder what the margin of error on that is, because once you start dividing up by demographics like that, you start to get smaller and smaller sample sizes.
Like maybe you only had 3 people in the 18 to 24 demographic.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how many people were actually in that cohort, and I'll try to find it.
Because another question: does Israel have a right to defend itself against terror attacks by launching airstrikes on heavily populated Palestinian areas with warnings to those citizens, or does not have that right? And in the 18 to 24 demographic, 80% said yes. 72% in the next category. It was all in the 80s and 70s going forward. So their answer there weren't any different. They said, should Israel cease all hostilities now or keep going until Hamas is defeated? And in that question, 57% of the youngest people said cease all hostilities now, which was more than anyone else. So it's all over the place, is what I'm saying. It's just like from question to question, it greatly varied. That makes me wonder if the poll was just, this is a competent polling firm, but maybe it was just poorly designed.
Yeah, either it was poorly designed or these people genuinely have conflicting views and perhaps don't realize it. I mean, also in this 18 to 24 cohort, we see 67% feel that university presidents did not go far enough condemning anti-Semitism, which is actually higher than the entire group that was surveyed. Only 62% of the entire group said that. And then also 68% agreed that Jewish students on campus are facing harassment. 67% of the 18 to 24-year-olds also said that it is that Jews as a class are oppressors and should be treated as such. Whereas 73% of all voters believe that's a false ideology. Yeah. It really is all over the place. I don't know what to make of this.
This specific question that generated the social media. So, do you think the long-term answer to the Israel-Palestinian dispute is for Arab states to be absorbed, for Arab states to absorb the Palestinians, for there to be two states, Israel and Palestine, or for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians? And in that one, there's this anomalously high 51% in the 18 to 24 demo says for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians. So maybe they didn't understand the question. Obviously, that's crazy to think that. I think. I mean, no, I don't know anyone who really maybe a very small radical group of people think that Hamas should be the governing authority of both Palestine, about the Palestinians and the Israelis. Like, that's not even the position of what I would say is like the very far left on this issue is not really that Hamas should also control. We should yes and what Hamas's current territorial position is. So maybe they were confused by the question. I mean, I certainly think
maybe they were thinking of the West Bank.
I don't know. I mean, based on the feedback I hear from viewers and commenters when Brianna and I discussed this, or when you and Jessica discussed this, I fully believe that there are a lot of young people who are more who think. I mean, I think that a lot of the Palestinian grievances are correct, and what's going on is very bad. And I would like some solution to this problem where they have full recognition and autonomy. And I am not at all co-signing everything Israel has done in the past or is doing now. With that, but while at the same time recognizing that Hamas is a terrorist organization and it is not safe for Israel to be on the borders of an area run by this organization, younger people clearly, I think, ascribe more justification to the attacks on October 7th, given what the Palestinian people have suffered, than I do or than older Americans do. So I don't deny that there is that sentiment out there. I see it when we discuss this issue, but I don't know.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating how vehemently people in general take sides on this issue. Like, you're either pro-Palestine or you're pro-Hamas, or pro-Israel, or you're pro-Hamas or you're pro-Israel. And I definitely don't like the characterization from some pro-Israeli people that if you are pro-Palestine, then you are necessarily supporting Hamas. I don't think that's the case for most of the people who talk about this issue. It certainly is for a minority of them, which is unfortunate. But very rarely do you hear people say, actually, I think both sides have probably done atrocious things here. Both sides have expressed opposition to a real two-state solution that keeps things somewhat territorially similar to how they are now, but perhaps gives more governing authority to the Palestinians and removes settlements from the West Bank. It seems like that viewpoint is not super represented in American discourse right now. And that's why it's so hard to have these conversations. Like, I find myself routinely getting frustrated because if I say anything on either side, I'm suddenly characterized as pro the other thing. And I feel like I'm pretty in the middle on this issue, to be frank.
That's exactly how I feel. I think you and I have kind of similar. We have different opinions on other issues, but I think we pretty similar on foreign policy. And I don't. And also I understand the criticism in that we're supporting Israel with our tax dollars. I felt the same way about Ukraine. That's not. I think American tax dollars should be spent at home. I think Americans are right to feel a little taken for a ride, that we're always summoned to help every other nation and their security while we have crumbling infrastructure and we have a wild amount of debt and we have all sorts of problems. And then we're called to defend Ukraine when our European counterparts aren't even spending nearly the same amount of money as we are. So why are the American people always put upon? So I absolutely think there's a thoughtful non-interventionist criticism of what's going on there. You know, how does this make us safer? Because really that should be the goal of U.S. foreign policy, to make the U.S. a safer place. We don't want to inspire terrorist attacks here. We don't want to put U.S. soldiers in harm's way that then necessitates a broader conflict. So I'm very much willing, you know, to discuss all of those things, you know, while at the same time, I obviously cannot, you know, endorse what was clearly a terrorist attack, and what would have merited a response. Every competent nation on earth would respond to that kind of thing with an attempt to root out the people who did it, unfortunately at the cost of civilian lives.
I often have the same reaction to the justification of what Hamas did, as, you know, the Palestinians have been oppressed for so long, as a sort of analogous argument that the left makes often domestically, which is like people who commit crimes need to have lighter sentences because it's merely because they're impoverished or their neighborhoods have been gentrified. And it's, to me, like the excuses don't work. Your actions stand on their own. You should take responsibility for them. And I have never in my life thought that it was acceptable to respond to a perceived injustice by killing everyone even vaguely associated with it, even if they didn't commit that injustice themselves, which is the case for so many of the Israeli people, especially the innocent civilians who were slaughtered on October 7th.
And it seems so unlikely. The result of that has now been a catastrophic loss of Palestinian life in the counterattack to root out Hamas. Like I said this before, but I'm so sympathetic to the Uyghurs. They're an absolutely oppressed population by China. Taiwan, Hong Kong. We can talk about all of the Chinese authoritarianism, but like if those groups, you know, responded to this by just like, you know, randomly kidnapping Chinese civilians or shooting people, like that would obviously be both not justified and be a really dumb idea. Like, how is that going to help your position? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, you should be going after the people who are responsible directly for your suffering, not people who you think would be convenient to have as hostages to force the other body to come to the table, or whatever Hamas's like deranged plan is.
Yeah, but it's a very difficult issue, and it is wild how worked up people get over it. People have very strongly held a view. I mean, this is an issue on college campuses, the Israel-Palestine. I'm sure you probably noticed as well. I noticed at the University of Michigan, nothing brought out people's rage quite like this issue, which is, you know, a kind of civil war, a regional conflict a world away. And here on American college campuses, it's the issue that results in more animosity than any other. So it doesn't seem like a healthy climate for addressing it. But we will continue to discuss it here. More Rising right after this.